Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. After stints working at Sainsbury's and in a Guildford nightclub, Daniel Lambert set up his own wine business in 1992 and has never looked back. I caught up with him from his new home in Montpellier to discuss his outspoken criticism of the UK's proposed new alcohol duty scheme, the role that Sauternes played in his early success, what he's learned from being dyslexic, going viral on Twitter, and which regions offer the best value for money. Daniel, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Tim. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and nice to hear your voice. You're in France, are you? Lucky man.
Yes. I'm just outside Montpellier. It's a very sunny day again down here, so all is good.
I think I hate you. We're going to find out later why you're in Montpellier and why you've moved down there. Tell us a bit more about yourself, because you're Daniel Lambert if you're English, and I presume if you're in France, you're Daniel Lambert, like the actor Christophe. Which you prefer, the French one or the English one?
It depends who I'm talking to. If it's the family, then it's definitely Lambert. But in the wine trade, it's definitely Lambert. As I say, it depends who I'm talking to.
And were both your parents French?
No. My father was French. My mother was from Dorset, but he moved to the UK when he was 18 to escape the rabble that was the south of France, Bordeaux area that he lived in. He was one of 10 children, number 9 in line.
Wow, you're not one of 10 as well, are you?
No. I'm one of 4 and the youngest of 4.
Still quite
I save the best to last, as I tell my siblings regularly.
And was wine part of your life growing up? I mean, French people normally drink wine. Did your dad drink wine at home?
Yes, it was. My father was very much into his wine. He didn't actually sell wine. He sold glassware from a French company into the UK. But I remember from a very early age that you would have wine mixed with water at your meal from the age of 5, 6, 7, which I think was a nice stepping stone into the industry.
Yeah, but it's very civilized, I think. I mean, some people regard it as child abuse, I'm sure, giving young kids alcohol to drink when they're young, but it's just kind of part of life in France, isn't it, wine, in that sense, or used to be? I don't know if it still is.
Absolutely. I think that, a natural product like wine being given to children mixed down with water, it's the same as squash, really. And it almost gets rid of that mystique that alcohol is bad for you. It's a cultural thing in France where wine is part of everyday life, and it should be. I don't see any problem with that whatsoever.
I mean, you were sort of brought up in Wimbledon to start with, not far from where I'm sitting today, actually, and then Farnham in Surrey. You didn't go to university because you found out, I think when you were 14 or so, you were dyslexic, and this affected your confidence. Has it gone on affecting you in life, dyslexia? Because it's not something you get over, is it?
No. I mean, dyslexia, you have it for life. It's basically word blindness. It's the inability to see written text as everybody else does, and being unable to write it in the same way. It's a word blindness. And when it was diagnosed when I was 13, back in the early 80s, you just had to get on with it, really. There was nothing else you could do about that. My understanding is that it's improved today, and you can buy certain AI programs that allow you to get around it. But I prefer just to get on with it and leave it as is. I've never seen it as a disability, but as some people love to point out, my legendary tweets sometimes have lots of typos in them, but I'm quite happy with that.
And it's the sentiment that matters, isn't it? We're going to talk about those later.
Yeah.
I mean, is it a condition that we understand better today than when you were a kid growing up?
My understanding is so, but, technically, I suppose it's a disability, but I don't see it like that. I just see it as who I am, really. I don't worry about it at all.
Your first job was at Sainsbury's, of all places, because you'd end up one day supplying wine to them. And that included some responsibility for beers, wines and spirits, I believe. Now, was the wine bug starting to bite you a little bit what were you then, 1920?
Yeah, exactly. I'd left school I finished college in Guildford when I was 18, and I was looking for something to do. I'd always had a penchant with the alcohol industry of such, and I always wanted to be part of it. Wasn't sure how to get into it, but wine was something I certainly wanted to experience. And it makes me laugh today that when I was working for Sainsbury's and I'd started my company up, I was in the process of not only supplying Sainsbury's with wine, but working for them at the same time, which is quite incredible. I'm sure that if head office knew that I was an employee in one of the regional branches, they wouldn't have been impressed.
Would they put you at the back of the queue or the front of the queue?
I don't know, but it is quite funny when you're working to subsidise your income, as I was at that point, and actually putting your own products on the shelf. That is quite funny.
What a brilliant moment where you can actually think, yes, it's mine.
Let's just say I gave it extra facial space.
yeah, exactly. Put them at the front. I mean, you had this little interlude, didn't you, where you worked as in a nightclub in Guildford for Rank Leisure. I mean, what were you doing? You don't strike me as a bouncer, but maybe I'm wrong. Were you?
No. I was basically. I mean, again, it was to have an income. I hadn't left home from my parents at this point, and I was looking to just have spending money more than anything. And I thought, well, working at night and striving to create the career during the day, that was the way forward. So yes, it was working behind the bar and doing cocktails and all of that stuff. I actually worked on a cocktail bar in there, and I can make some mean little cocktails actually, and I did quite well at that. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
So we do Sainsbury's and the nightclub and setting up your own business, which we'll talk about in a sec.
I did Sainsbury's for 1.5 years in a junior management position. Got very fed up with how they exploited their junior managers at that point. So then decided to do the nightclub thing. And at this point, my father, I think, was losing the will to live and suggested maybe I should get into the wine trade properly.
And then you went back to Sainsbury's?
And then I went back to Sainsbury's night shift because I was working effectively 2 jobs then. So I was doing night shifts Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, and working full time in the week doing the wine side of things. So that was in 1992 when I started all of this up.
And what made you decide to set up Daniel Lambert Wines in 1992? Because I think your uncle, who'd worked a little bit in the wine business had worked in the wine business all his life, hadn't he?
Yes.
Was he kind of influential at the start? Did he push you into it, saying go for it?
Yeah. No, he was really quite almost a stepping stone into it. I mean, he worked for Dort Cressman, the negociant based in Bordeaux, all of his life. He retired about 15 years ago now, but he basically said, look, I can put you in touch with a couple of producers who will be interested in having their wines onto the UK market if you can find somewhere to sell to them. So it was very much in at the deep end from the very, very start. My role was, at the time, I was given 3 properties that he knew who were friends of his that he had shared space with at Vinexpo. All of this, at the time, I knew none of what this all meant, of course, but he had these contacts around France. One was in Alsace, one was in Bergerac, and one was in Rioja, of all places. So I took these wines and started to go and visit wine shops. And I think probably the first phone call I ever made to a supermarket was Waitrose and David Grandgeorge MW. And an agency I'd sourced myself, which was an Utel Requena from a property out there. And I was trying to educate David Grandgeorge MW on where Utel Requena was and that what Spanish wine was really something he should be looking at.
In those days, you could just pick the phone up and speak to a buyer direct. You'd have trouble now, wouldn't you?
Exactly, yeah. And bless David, he entertained the phone call for nearly 20 minutes. So
lovely,
hat off to him for putting up with that.
And did he buy the wine?
No, obviously not, no.
20-minute phone call, he didn't even buy the wine. Oh, man.
But this was the days of gentlemen in the wine trade, and, this was Waitrose then. I mean, it's a very different kettle of fish now, obviously, but it still tickles me pink today to think about that.
So when did the business become self-sufficient? Because you were doing that, and as you said, you were also doing the Sainsbury's night shift. When did you finally think, okay, I can make a go of this?
So it was 1999 that I basically didn't have to work nights anymore. So it took the best part of 7 years to get to
doing 2 jobs.
To have 2 jobs, and to be self-sufficient. In that time, I met my wife Helen. We got married in '97, and by 1999 we were self-sufficient and starting to really develop something that was interesting.
I mean, what made you successful, do you think, in those early days? I mean, how did you turn it into a business? Was it it was just hard work, obviously, but did the fact that you were French or that you'd worked in retail as well, do you think that helped, that you knew that side of it?
I've always kept the same ethos all the way through. I've always wanted to source something that was really good and representative of the region, appellation, DOC, AOP, whatever it happens to be, of the region, that was offering value, that I thought, this is a nice product that hasn't made it to market yet. But most importantly, the most important ethos for me was it's coming from a family business. I've always fundamentally believed that the wine world, when it comes to family businesses, they just care a little bit more than the bigger producers and the cooperatives and the negotiations, et cetera, et cetera. I've always had that belief, and it's stood me well over 32 years now, whereby the portfolio is still made up at 99% of independent producers. And those independent producers are very keen to look after their brand and look after developing their sales in the market. So if you're working with who we try to work with, which is, more upmarket and independent producers stroke retailers, the two sort of go hand in hand. So it's 32 years of sticking to my guns and saying, well, actually, this is what I want to do. I don't really want to follow what everyone else is doing.
Yeah. And it's slightly unlikely, especially given where sweet wines are today. It was a Sauterne agency, wasn't it, that played an important role in your system. That was probably the wine you were putting on the shelves at Sainsbury's, wasn't it, when you were working there?
It exactly was, yes. It exactly was that. I mean, yeah, Chateau Fillot, Sauterne Grand Cru Classé, we started the agency with them, and it is my longest serving agency. I got that in 1994, if I remember correctly. It was 2 years in. And the family owners then, both sadly since deceased, but the family owners at the time, how can I put it? They were pioneering. They were really pioneering. They could see the faults with the Place and the Bordeaux system, and they wanted to try and break free from it. And again, at the time, I was blissfully unaware of how political the Bordeaux system was. So for them, it was like breath of fresh air. And I was like, well, hang on, this is a Grand Cru Classé. This should be easy to sell. People are going to know what this is. So when I approached pretty much every national retailer in the UK, they all snapped it up because I guess, again, I'm showing my naivety at the time. I didn't realise that the buyers at the time realised that they were bypassing the system. They were bypassing the Place. And they were actually...
So the Place is basically the Place, just to explain to people, is a system whereby people have to sell through négociants, who are middlemen, really, and courtiers.
Exactly, yeah. We wiped out 2 tiers of middlemen to be able to provide a Grand Cru Classé from producer direct to retailer. And something that Bordeaux's been trying to not let happen for many, 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 many decades. So Chateau Fillot, in that response, were seriously pioneering and took a massive risk in doing it, because they could have effectively turned their back on the Place, and that wouldn't have gone down well, because obviously today, en primeur continues, and it's important that you're part of the Place and that the negotiations support you. I understand that, but they felt that they weren't being supported at the time, and so contacted me. And I mean, we achieved incredible things. We achieved 120,000 bottles of sales per annum for nearly 3 years back to back. Which is incredible.
It is. Tell us a little bit about awards, because you won lots of awards. I know you're very proud of them. How important have they been to your success, enabling you to build on what you established?
Again, I think it's been an interesting journey that in 2009, we received our first IWC award. We received the Welsh Wine Merchant Award. Obviously, at this point, I'd moved to Wales and had settled there. So we were basically the best. And then the following year, for the first time ever, the Burgundy Specialist Award had left London and the Southeast. And I think at that point, people were like, who is this guy who is taking what is one of the most traditional awards you can get? I mean, between Bordeaux and Burgundy, you can't really be any more traditional in the industry. So for suddenly a guy at that stage, literally a guy in a secretary in a warehouse in South Wales, to have the prestigious Burgundy Award, that sent shockwaves through the industry. People were like, well, okay, who is this guy? How has he managed to beat the established names to this award? And again, I go back to the ethos that we had at that time. A very, very broad range of Burgundy wines from independent producers, from Chablis through to Beaujolais, in pretty much every appellation. But it was all individual producers, and it was all wines that had done particularly well in that year in the IWC competition for wine. And so I think the judges at the time recognised, hang on a minute, this is a guy that's taken the industry by storm and is actually selling this wine to large swathes of the industry, and this needs to be recognised. And I think it was a wake-up call to the industry generally that anybody can achieve great things in this industry so long as you're keeping to an ethos, keeping to a plan, trying to do the right thing. Since then, we've won 29 awards. So
they're two a penny now, aren't they? But I mean, what makes a successful wine merchant, and just has that changed since 1992? Do you think of yourself as a good salesman? You've talked about the relationships you have with families, and often you're finding stuff that nobody else has got. They're unique products, aren't they? What else makes a good wine merchant? I just wonder, has that changed in the 32 years you've been doing it?
I think it's evolving for sure. It's absolutely evolving, and the wine ranging is definitely evolving. I think that it's a two-tier question. There's a very different purpose to importers to retailers. So a wine merchant is a term that can cover both. So it's important that people understand that in the day and age we're in the post-Brexit world, it's difficult to be a wine retailer and be into importation. That's actually become very hard, but I'm sure we'll touch on that later. In terms of what makes a good wine merchant, I think that you've got to have integrity. I think that's the most important characteristic, to have integrity and to stick to trying your very hardest to source commercially good wine. But that doesn't mean necessarily expensive, because some of the wines I source are ridiculously cheap and inexpensive. But so long as you know what the public is actually looking for, which I think sometimes the public don't know what they're looking for, and it's easy to put wines on promotion and it's easy to get things sold in volume if you just discount. That's the easy way out. But to be a solidly good wine merchant, I think you have to have a range of wine that's been responsibly, sensibly and sustainably sourced. Personally, my view is that if you get that from sustainable, responsible producers who more often than not care about their land and care about their grape and care about their viticulture and viniculture, then you're going down very much the right road, because that will come through in the end product. You can see, well, I can see a mass-produced product a mile off when I try it. Where you've got overuse of sulfur because it's been through flexi tank and it's been through a bottling in the UK or such and such. Those wines are the wines that will leave you with a bad head in the morning. I always say when I have a bottle or two of my own products from various producers, I never ever ever get a hangover. I never get a headache in the morning ever.
I like that. Buy Daniel Lambert wines, folks. They don't give you a hangover.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll tell you what, I was in a hotel about 3 weeks ago, and I won't say the hotel and I won't say the supplier to it because I know who they are, but I won't say it. But I was looking through the list and I thought, well, this is a pretty dour list. There's not very much exciting stuff. And I went for the least bad option, which was the Eden Valley Australian Riesling. And what I didn't notice until after I drank it, that it had actually been bottled in Germany. And I only had 2 glasses of it. Now, the wine itself at the moment was fine, but the following day, the headache was unbelievable. And that was purely down to the fact it had been flexi-tanked from Australia to Germany, and obviously they had numerous sulphur treatments along the route.
Saturated with sulphur, yeah. Just tell us which areas you specialise in. I mean, we know about France, so that's the focus of the business, isn't it? But, I mean, you've done stuff from California, you've done stuff from Wales, I know, Spain, as you said, you've had a long relationship with Rioja. Where else do you buy from?
I source currently from France. Is 80% of what we do. Then I'm getting very excited about what's happening in the US, both north of the border in Canada, California. Obviously, we're doing some really fantastic stuff from New York State. I'm very excited about those wines. The week after next, I'm off to Mexico to judge at the Concours Mondial de Brussels. But we get the opportunity to go and visit the Mexican vineyards, which I'm really looking forward to, because I would love to source something from Mexico. That would be really fun. But yes, we also source from Austria, Germany, France, a little bit from Italy, quite a lot from Spain. We've done stuff from Australia, South Africa. I used to source from New Zealand, but every single time I took a New Zealand agency, within 2 years, the winery sold out to a bigger corporate, which was a real pity because I found some absolute gems in New Zealand. So currently today, we're sticking to our guns. I would say our forte is France number one, the US number two, Spain number three. Those are the three areas where we're really very, very good now.
I'm interested in what you think about value for money. I mean, as you said, value for money is not necessarily the same thing as cheap, although it can be. Where's the best value to be found these days? And I'm also going to ask you where you think the worst value is to be found.
Okay, it's a fantastic thing. I think that value is not about the cost of the wine. It's a number of things. It's about the quality of the product. I always put the quality of the products as first. For me, that's the most important thing, because there's no value in something if you don't like it. You're wasting your time. You're not going to drink it. So you might as well buy something that you like. Now, it doesn't have to be expensive, but equally, it doesn't have to be cheap. It has to be good. And I think that's sometimes, in my humble opinion, I think some buyers miss out on that. They're constantly being pushed to find the cheapest they can find. And that's sometimes not the best way forward. I don't actually think consumers want cheap the whole time. I think that they're actually looking for something that's really lovely to drink. It's the old adage, oh yeah, I bought a bottle of wine and it's lovely if you drink it with a bottle of soda water. That's not really
well, that's not good, is it?
That's not.
So come on, where's the best? Well, tell us the best and the worst value. I'm going to push you on.
So for me, value, it's from producers that are able to produce something around the 35 to 50 hectolitre mark, where the quality comes through, and value-wise, in terms of price, you're not really paying ex-sellers more than, say, €5. That's where it really is quite interesting.
What would that be on the shelf then? Sort of 12 quid?
12, 13 quid, yeah. That seems to be, unfortunately, where the UK government has put it now, is 12, 13 quid. This all being said, I mean, last year I did a lot of work in Gascony because I wanted to change the current incumbent we had for the independent sector. And we sourced a product that hadn't been in the UK at all. And so I basically sourced 20 different properties. I tried all the wines, came back with a result of a particular property, which was Domaine Guillemot. And they had never been in the UK market at all, ever. They'd never sourced it. They were producing 1.3 million bottles, but it was going to Belgium, Germany, and Holland, and obviously France. And on visiting them, I thought, well, you know, it's going to be tumbleweed in this part of France. It's pretty remote. It's not somewhere you're going to go. But actually, the winery turned out to be absolutely state of the art. To the point where they were vinifying under zero oxygen conditions by capturing nitrogen in the actual atmosphere and pumping it through to the winery so that they could actually vinify and store at 100% under nitrogen. Now that's really,
so France,
really cool.
France still good value, obviously. Spain, pretty amazing value.
Yes.
You'd say?
I think France, you get fantastic value. Bizarrely, if you hunt around, you can actually get good value in Canada. So our Canadian agency, when you actually look at it, Canadian wine is generally quite expensive, but Westcott, their wines should be double the price that they actually are, but they're not, because they're new to the game and they're wanting to actually break international market rather than local. So when you can pick up a bottle of Canadian Pinot Noir that's on par with somewhere like Savigny Le Bon in Burgundy, but retails out for 24, 25 quid.
That sounds good.
That's great value for money. Yeah. So it's all relative. It's all relative to what you're looking at.
I think it's very true. Listen, we're going to talk about politics now, as you've become something of a political figure over the last few years. I mean, were you always interested in politics? Were you political as a kid? Were you a member of a party? Did you go on demonstrations and marches and stuff like that?
I'm somebody that wants to see a system that's fair for all. I believe that everybody needs to put into a system and everybody should get a fair amount out of a system. And we haven't really had that in the UK recently. You've had a system that's been very weighted towards one agenda. And when I look at what's happening with our industry, the wine industry, I despair at how the industry is being kicked time and time again with legislation that is just going to make it more and more expensive for consumers to enjoy a glass of wine. At the end of the day, if you go to most countries in the world, wine is nowhere near taxed the level it is in the UK. Now, I fully accept that wine should be taxed. I have no problem with that at all. And if the UK decides to tax it at this level, again, that's fine. At the end of the day, wine is a luxury product. We have to accept that. If we didn't have wine in our lives, it would be very sad, but nobody's going to die. So, yes, wine should be taxed. But the government have a responsibility to make the administration of movement of wine, particularly in the UK, where 99.1% of all wine is imported, as easy as possible. And the converse is currently happening. It's now virtually, for a layperson to import wine, it's virtually impossible. It's specialist importers, and there are not that many in the UK, that are actually doing the job now for much of the UK. When you talk to independents who used to bring in, a pallet of wine from a small producer in France or Spain or Italy or wherever, they no longer do that now. They're now completely reliant on agents like me and the other guys. And I think that's a sad thing. I think that's really sad. I think that's it's diminishing what was available previously in the UK, whereby the UK used to be the place where everybody tried to keep up to as a market. And today, I think that there's a lot of producers that look at the UK and think, can I actually be bothered?
It's not worth it. Ted, I just wonder what you say to people who tell you to stick to wine. This happens to me a lot. I'm reasonably political too. And, do you think it's silly in a sense to look at wine as something which is disconnected from the rest of life, politics included?
I think wine is central to life. I mean, it's a product that brings everybody together in a really lovely way. I mean, it's where we should all strive to be together, to have a conversation and thrash out issues over a glass of wine. I can't think of anything better, frankly. But when you've got the situation we currently have in the UK, whereby registration of this, that, and the other is making it more increasingly difficult and more costly, more than anything, to actually do your day-to-day job, that's not good. That's quite oppressive, in fact. When I compare to living here in France, and you look at the taxation and how wine is distributed in France, it's very relaxed, it's very easy, and most things accessible. And obviously the French are very patriotic, and you struggle to find non-French wines in France. That's true. But the UK used to be a global leader, and I feel that that's slipping. When I go to San Francisco and I visit the wine independent shops there, bearing in mind that you're in a wine region, San Francisco these days is years ahead of where the UK is as a market in terms of ranging, sophistication, and
we've lost that.
Yeah? We have, yeah. I absolutely think the UK's it hasn't totally lost it yet, but it's certainly losing it, and that's very, very sad indeed.
I mean, you've been particularly critical of Brexit. You regularly call it a shit show, very publicly. How did Brexit affect your business? Pretty badly, didn't it?
It's not been a bundle of laughs, it's got to be said. I mean, we prepared for Brexit 7-8 months before it actually happened. Bearing in mind, you have to remember that the Brexit deal, or the free trade agreement, was done on December the 24th. So unless you were going on the premise of no deal, you really had no time to prepare for it, nor did the government for that matter. But in terms of my business, we prepared 7-8 months before time, and I went on the basis that we were going to get no deal. And I thought the only way around this is to actually have our own bonded warehouse and bring the border to us, rather than the border being in Dover or Folkestone or a seaport. So we brought all of the issues in, and we got all the certification, which was incredibly time consuming, but we achieved it by, I think it was October 2019. We had our bonded facility agreed. We had our RoRo licenses, and I won't go through all the other various licensing that we needed, but we got everything in place. And then Brexit happened, and then the legendary tweet came out that I put out in early 2020, because I spent 16 days trying to clear stock into the UK on a system that clearly wasn't designed to let you clear stock from Europe into the UK. And I'll never forget getting a call from the head of HMRC 15 days into Brexit and pointing out to them that the Free Trade Agreement code, which was U110, hadn't actually been applied to chief the importing system. So for the first 15 days of the UK having an FTA with the EU, nobody imported anything tariff-free because HMRC hadn't applied the code.
That really does make it a shit show, doesn't it? I mean, you moved to France, didn't you? I mean, because of it, really.
Yeah, I mean, by this point, I mean, I've always wanted to move to France. I won't try and say that I moved because of Brexit. It certainly encouraged me to move a lot faster, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's got to the point whereby the implications of Brexit and what's required to move stock, and the fact that you've got the cartel of brokers controlling the amount of money that they can wean off everybody importing across the border. I thought that's all fundamentally wrong. I mean, it's just not correct. It's just not right. It's just not fair for importers trying to do their job. So by moving to France, the idea is and was to be able to obtain all the French certification requirements for French customs, or EU customs, should I say, and have the REX number. Because we now do all the certification for the UK government. We don't pay any broker fees on the UK side at all, which gives us a competitive edge, obviously. But I'm trying to do the same on the French side or the EU side so that we don't pay any fees in terms of importation out of Europe. And one of the big hurdles that a lot of producers didn't want to sign up to was getting a REX number. They didn't see why they should get a REX number, but to supply the UK market, they've all had to apply for this extra burden to be able to export out of the EU. And so it's putting barriers to trade. And this is the interesting thing. People think, oh, well, there's an FTA. What are you making a fuss for? Yes, there is an FTA, but an FTA is not the same as barriers to trade. People still today don't understand the two are very, very different things. Yes, we have an FTA. That's just about tariffs, and tariffs only adds 10p.
FTA, free trade agreement, yeah?
Yeah, free trade agreement. It only adds 10p on a bottle because that would be what's known in the industry as CCT. That's a minimal amount of money. Barriers to trade, on the other hand, is a huge amount of money because you're talking about brokers who are charging up to 175 quid for a piece of paper on both sides of the channel. So that's 300 quid added to your cost. I recently spoke to somebody. I won't name the person, but they actually voted. They're in the industry, but they actually voted Brexit. And they said to me, we stopped importing from Europe because it just got too expensive. And he said, so it used to be about 180 quid to ship a pallet. I'm guessing it's probably what, 200, 300 pounds? I said, no. A single pallet from Europe, from pretty much anybody now, with all the fees, etc., is about 600 quid now. Wow. And that's what people don't realise, that
that's got to go on the bottom line, right? It's got to go on the price of the bottom line.
This has driven a lot of the inflation in the UK has been driven by Brexit. Clear and simple. There's no doubt in my mind. If you're going to triple the cost of shipping stuff to the UK from previously, it's only going to do one thing, and that's going to cause inflation on price points. And I correctly forecasted in my thread from 2020 that the bottle of wine cost would go up around about £1.50 to £2 a bottle. I was absolutely correct in hindsight.
You were right. Yeah. Let's take a little about these threads. I mean, a couple of them have gone viral, haven't they? These sort of 26-part threads. One of them, 18,000 likes. Lots of papers picked it up, and James O'Brien, the chat show host, he picked it up. What did it do for your profile? And I mean, did you get attacked as well? I mean, I find if you stick your head above the parapet, there's always going to be people that have a pop at you as well.
Yeah. There's always going to be the hardcore that don't like you sticking your head above the parapet. I mean, look, I'm a guy who's always been very independent of mind and independent of thought, and I've very much done my own thing. For 32 years, I've been self-sufficient, and I haven't, I have my fantastic customers, and I've got some great relationships in the industry, and I'm very grateful for those. But my opinions are my opinions, and like them or leave them, I'm trying to do the right thing by the industry. Now, yes, it's sure that particular thread got 6 million impressions in the UK.
6 million? Wow.
It had 6 million impressions. And so obviously you're going to get people that don't like the fact you're pointing out how it is. And so I'm very, very careful what I put out on social media. And what I say to people like James O'Brien when I go on his show and when I've been in the Guardian or the Financial Times or any of these papers, because you're opening yourself up to scrutiny, I think is the word that would be best suited. And so therefore it's for me, it's essential to keep it as factual as possible. If you keep it factual and what you're saying is factually correct, then you don't open the door to the people that would like to shout you down to be able to shout you down as much as they try, because I know what I'm talking about is factually correct. And so, yes, I've put my head above the parapet, and yes, I got known in the industry. And there are Tim, my salesperson who works for me, a number of agents or competitors who I think should be putting their head above the parapet as well, but that's their decision. Often say, well, his politics is one thing, but you can't argue with his wine range, which I suppose is the nicest way of putting it.
Your latest battle is the duty scheme that's going to come in February 2025. We're currently in something known as wine easement. I mean, the new duty bans are bonkers. I mean, another shit show, and who knows? Maybe they may not happen now, because if the Tories lose the election on July the 4th, who knows what's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's probably the most important thing that everybody in the industry needs to be really quite worried about. I mean, VI1's winning that was one thing. VI1's would have been pretty damaging.
What were VI1s? Just tell everybody quickly.
The VI1s are something that the EU basically put into European system. So it's basically a declaration from an importer outside the EU to show the quality of the product, the alcohol levels, and to confirm where it was made, so that you don't get a Chablis from Mexico or a champagne from Australia. It's basically protecting the DOCs, the AOPs, the IGPs within the European community, so that those areas of origin, if you like, PDOs, are protected, and that nobody outside the Europe can sell those names inside the European Union. A very sensible measure, actually. Because it wasn't long ago that you used to have Canadian champagne, for example. And obviously champagne, as we all know, comes from northern France. So that was the VI1 form, and it prevented that from happening. The UK was going to introduce VI1s because of its withdrawal agreement being so bad that they were basically in a position where they wanted to introduce VI1s for European producers to send a UK VI1, so it was completely unnecessary.
And you overcame that, didn't you? But tell us about the duty system now. I mean, because we're in wine easement, which is what, £2.67 between 12.5 and 40.5% alcohol.
Correct,
what's going to replace it in theory on February 1, 2025?
Okay, so the easement was put in place because when Rishi Sunak came up with the legislation in 2020, it came from it's Justin Howard-Steed MW who actually revealed this. I didn't know this, and then with a bit of help from Gavin Quinney down in Bordeaux, the two of them revealed that the actual legislation has come from a think tank of prohibitionists on Tufton Street. That's where the actual legislation has been dreamt up. And the idea was that prohibitionists obviously know that they wouldn't be able to, how can I put it? They wouldn't be able to say to the general public, you mustn't drink, it's bad for you. So they've tried to find, in their words, a way of making it more difficult to import wine. And this really does make it more difficult, because what they actually want to do is tax pure alcohol. That's the idea. Now, on paper, that makes perfect sense. I don't see an issue with that. But the practicalities of wine don't allow that, because ABV in wine is not predetermined. And that's the most important thing to understand in this whole debate, that alcohol in wine isn't predetermined. Alcohol,
it's not like a bottle of whiskey, which is 40% alcohol most of the time, right? Yeah,
exactly.
So wine can be 5.5% to 22% alcohol. Right?
Exactly. It's exactly that. Yeah. And it all depends on the sunshine hours. So if you've got whiskey or beer, you have a recipe, if you like. You make your recipe and you end up with your product at the alcohol percentages that you wanted. And so therefore, with labelling, marketing, and predetermined alcohol levels, you know exactly where you're going to be for years and years and years, because you're following a recipe. Wine does not work like that. Wine, on the other hand, is predetermined in the fact that the sun is what's ripening the grapes. And so therefore alcohol levels in wine will vary every single vintage. And if you're making some of these flexi tank wines, there's no reason why an alcohol in a flexi tank wine is going to be the same, because you're bringing in raw product from various sources and blending something together. Yes, you can predetermine an alcohol level, but it will change.
It's insane.
When you're talking about the stuff I sell, small producers who are literally growing grapes, letting the sun ripen them, hopefully without too much rain, just the right amount of rain, but et cetera, that alcohol level can vary from 12 to 15% in any one vintage.
And every 0.1% will pay a different duty level, right?
Exactly, yeah. So what they want to do is they want to basically tax at every... They did originally want to do every 0.1%. I think even they've realised that isn't going to be very clever. So you've got this, I believe the way it currently stands is that it's at 0.5. So every 0.5, you basically increase the duty level by effectively 10 to 12p a bottle in excise cost at cost.
So anybody who likes wine that has 14.5% alcohol, like Chateauneuf du Pape or a lot of Argentinian Malbecs or something, is going to pay more for their wine, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's so many silly things that come out of it. So, for example, your Brexiteers who really dislike, let's say, European wine, but the reality is, and they'll tell you, I get it regularly on Twitter, oh, well, I'll go and buy my wine from Australia. Okay, fine, no problem, buy your wine from Australia. But what they don't realise is that this policy that's apparently a Brexit freedom is going to make Australian wine considerably more expensive. And German Riesling, on the other hand, which is a cool climate wine, is going to be considerably cheaper. So what Brexit in this response is actually doing is making German wine cheaper.
which is wonderful irony. Well, let's hope you stop it, or that a Labour Party government, a new Labour government, if we get one, will do away with it, because it's crazy. Last question, because we're running out of time. How do you get away from wine? You're looking tanned, you're looking healthy, you've been to the beach, you nasty man. How you get away from wine, has that changed since you moved to France?
I've made some good friends down here. So just last night we went down to a lovely little beach bar for dinner. So yeah, that was great. But yes, it's a different lifestyle now I'm here. Obviously I'm working during the week and visiting the UK twice a month. I'm in the UK visiting customers on my flying visits. But when it comes to getting away from wine, there's plenty of other things to do. I've got a family that my kids are now just leaving home. So after 20 years of bringing kids up, we're actually going to be free to go traveling and visit new things. So, my wife and I, for the first time ever, we're doing our Barbados thing, because obviously I do a lot of sales in Barbados, but she's coming with me and she's going to be joining me on these trips whilst they're wine trips, but actually also sightseeing and touring some really exotic places. So we're going to Marrakesh in July, which will be exciting. I'm quite looking forward to that.
Sounds brilliant. And I like the fact that, you're still Daniel Lambert to me, but I think obviously in France now you're Daniel Lambert. Yes, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you all for everything you do for the wine industry. And I think it takes guts to do what you've done. As you said, I think sometimes it's meant that people may have delisted wines you've done, but you've spoken your truth. And I think we should all thank you for doing that, because I think, at least from my point of view, it's a truth that needs speaking.
Yeah, and as I say, we're all in this industry together. We all have to look after each other. I always say, and it's the nicest analogy of all, we live in a global village in the wine trade. And
sounds brilliant.
That's the nice way I like to think.
Well, I shall see you very soon, somewhere in that global village. Daniel Lambert, thank you. Great to see you.
Cheers.
I love Daniel's energy, honesty and work ethic, as well as the fact that he's willing to put his head above the parapet. And if you've been listening from the start, this was our 200th episode. Hooray! Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is the Spanish-based master of wine, Noel Robertson, known as the Flying Scotsman. See you then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, @timatkin, and on Instagram, @timatkinmw. See you next week.